without doing further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Punch, who is the Director, Segment Marketing at ARM. He has the industry experience in business strategy and product management. And a warm welcome to him. Would like to call Ms. Laurence. She is the Director, Telco Media Entertainment. She has more than 20 years of experience in international sales, marketing, and partner management. Welcome, Ms. Laurence. It's a pleasure to have you here. Would like to invite Mr. Jayanta, the Executive President of 5G Business at HFCL, has been responsible to develop the 5G systems and the integrations for the HFCL business. Would like to invite Mr. Kailash Narayanan, the President, Communications Group at Keysight Technologies. Would like to have Mr. Parag, who is the co-founder and CEO at Saankhya Labs, an experience of semiconductors, embedded softwares, more than 20 years. We would like to invite Mr. Manish Gangey, who is the head of R&D at Bharti Airtel, has more than 20 years of experience. I think we heard a lot on the Open RAN, but this topic itself is very deep and dynamic. I think now we have the panel members would like to ask some of the questions. So the first one to Ms. Laurence. We have all heard on the Open RAN in the last session, but would really like to understand your views. How do you look at from an implementation perspective? So we've discussed about the value chain, where you think it's going to benefit the most, and how do you look at the implementation to go in a very efficient way? What are the key considerations to look for?
Okay, good, it's on. So maybe what I wanted to do before, diving into some of those considerations is just to provide the, the view on where we come from and so on. So I think we all agree about the fact that the Open RAN initiative is an initiative that has been really welcomed by the industry as a way to restore the RAN vendor supply chain diversity, right, which had massively eroded over the past decade. And it achieves that through two levels of disaggregation. The first one, which is the horizontal one, and focuses on the standardization of the interfaces between the different RAN functions. And the second one, which is a vertical one, and focuses on the interdependencies of the RAN functions with the underlying cloud. What it has delivered as a first instance, and that really touches on the TCO aspects, is the ability for customers to decouple the RAN software from the proprietary hardware. Now, with the event of cloud native architecture, we see more and more customers wanting to leverage the Open Telco Cloud platform that they have deployed in other part of the network, and that could be, for instance, in their 5G core, and expand that platform towards the edge and far edge of their network to deploy RAN workloads, right? So that has obviously some inherent cost benefits, but that is also very important because that conditions the service provider ability to deploy additional workloads at the edge that will help them monetize their 5G investments, right? So so that is that is one. Now coming, when you discuss about the stack disaggregation and all that, which I just described, I think, and you actually talked about it. For me, the key consideration coming to mind is obviously the importance of the ecosystem play. It takes a villages. There is not a single vendor that can properly address the some of the challenge inherent to the stack disaggregation, right? And this is where the work that we are doing, jointly as an industry, working, all the way from the chipset manufacturers to, the hardware vendors, the public cloud providers, the application workload players, all the way to the orchestration is really critical, because at the end of the day, our customers are looking for end-to-end solutions, right? They are not looking, for to buy a single component. They are looking at something that is going to, address their, TCO and revenue concerns. And so to that effect, I mean, we, as Red Hat, we drive a lot of, the CNF and VNF certification validation. We work extensively with many vendors across the board, to develop joint blueprint. So that aims not only at to certify the workloads, but also looking at more, functional elements, right? That includes, the scalability of the solution, the platform footprint, orchestration, and all those aspects that makes a solution viable. And then the last point that I would add, and I kind of alluded to that a little bit before, really relates to the fact that you should not consider investing in the platform in isolation, because again, this is not only about Open RAN, it's also about how you're going to monetize, those investments through, the add-on of additional applications that are, generate those future revenues.
Sure, Laurence. I think a quick follow-up question. You touch on very, some points which have been raised in the previous panel as well. What do you think could be the barriers in the adoption? Any top 2 points which you think could be a barrier, or you think it's already been accepted globally? It has to be accepted in every country as well. But any 2 barriers which you think, where you talked about VNF, ONS and all, or it's a mainstream now?
No, I think look, it's becoming more and more mainstream, and I think things takes time, right? And it evolves, and the whole ecosystem matures. So if you ask me, I think we are definitely getting there. Is there still work to be done? Absolutely, and discussions are ongoing, and I think that was also touched upon during the panels yesterday, around maturity of the orchestration, aspects related to lifecycle management and all that, right? But those are, again, not a vendor specific issue, it's an industry issue, and that's where again, it takes a village type of approach is really critical for for the success.
Thanks, Laurence. I think over to Mr. Jayanta.
Okay.
Ms. Laurence talked about edge computing. I think that's we have been hearing in the last session as well. How do you see the Open RAN as a catalyst to the 5G and edge computing use cases? And considering we have a mix of the legacy networks and the networks that are emerging, how do you link some kind of an interoperability among them?
Sure. So the edge, first of all, let me define the edge, because the edge means many things to many people. So edge, in my view, is where the user data and the machine data and the sensor data gets generated. So processing data at the edge, helps you with real time, getting real time insights, real time actions for your mission critical services, right? So that's the benefit of edge. And the good part is the combinatorial effect of 5G with its low latency and the ability to support large number of IoT devices combined with edge computing, right, gives you the flexibility to address a lot of diverse use cases, which was not possible before. Like, you take remote healthcare, you take robotics-based precision manufacturing, or you take autonomous vehicle. This, I think, combination of 5G and edge computing makes it possible. Now, how does Open RAN help here? Open RAN helps you have flexible deployment options to address the diverse use cases. Now, in Open RAN, using Open RAN, your workloads can run on bare metal, on-premise, or on cloud. So using Open RAN, you can have very flexible deployment options to address the diverse use cases. Secondly, because of Open RAN, it is much easier to integrate with the existing IT infrastructure of an existing enterprise, right? So these are the benefits I see, Open RAN helping in addressing some of the use cases related to edge computing.
And how do you look at from an infrastructure standpoint, because for an edge to happen, we need an IoT ecosystem. We need a high-speed content delivery networks. That remains a challenging part as well. Would you like to share any insight, any view on that?
Yeah. So, first of all, here, for all these things to happen, a number of things have to come into place. So, one of it, is the end-to-end network. It is just not about about the radio network, the transport network, or the core. End-to-end, the network has to have low latency if we talk about some of the edge computing use cases, right? Similarly, how do you have compute at the edge, right? It is one thing to be able to manage a centralized cloud. When you talk about edge cloud, which has very low compute, right, where power availability may be an issue, how do you automate management and orchestration of the edge devices, right? So those are some of the challenges, and fortunately today there are solutions out there, including from Red Hat, OpenShift, which helps address some of those challenges.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Jayanta. I'd like to go to Mr. Kailash. From a deployment of Open RAN perspective, what kind of test challenges you envisage, and how can that standards of the testing can be implemented in a better way?
Great. Thank you for the question. And just wanted to pick up on the previous panel's discussion. We're very bullish about ORAN. Of course, it brings in a lot of innovation and new applications, but it's not going to be easy. And as the gentleman from Capgemini talked about, if you are interested in a quick reduction in OPEX or CAPEX, that's not ORAN. However, if you persist with it and overcome the challenges, it promises a lot of benefit. From a test, I'd like to reframe the discussion not necessarily as a test challenge. It's really an enablement challenge. How is this technology going to be enabled? How is the deployment going to be enabled? You look at ORAN, with the disaggregation, you have many different components, many different subsystems. So testing is not only going to have to happen, and enablement is not only going to have to happen at the component level or the module level. You need to have that. You need to have module-to-module interoperability. You need to have wraparound testing capabilities on subsystems and systems. So that's in and of itself an n-dimensional problem. On top of that, testing needs to address typical situations like conformance, radio compliance, things of that nature. We talked about interoperability testing, but deployment is going to be a huge challenge, right? Deployment enablement and deployment performance, functional capabilities, security, robustness, these are additional challenges that the industry has to overcome. So we provide those capabilities. For example, you can look at an open DU unit, and you may implement some measurements in the open DU unit to, let's say, assess your RIC applications or XApp applications performance. However, that might result in a power increase or energy consumption increase elsewhere in the network. So testing really needs to be all-encompassing, and it needs to be at a whole system level. The other thing we look at is you've got hundreds and thousands of cell sites, and you have hundreds and thousands, hundred thousands of and millions of cell subscribers. How are you going to emulate all of this ahead of deployment? So AI/ML technologies do come into play, and we have to figure out how to train those AI/ML algorithms, create data sets, train those data sets, emulate all of that in the lab before live deployment. And that's not easy. And in cases where you don't have the data sets, you have to rely on synthetic data, things of that nature. So that's another type of an enablement challenge we need to overcome. The previous panel talked about security. Clearly, with so many different components and subsystems, the threat surface is a lot higher. They said open is more secure. It is, by definition, it is not more secure. We have to make it more secure. So DevSecOps technology, factoring in fuzzing and DOS and port vulnerabilities, protocol vulnerabilities, all of those aspects have to be checked out. This is a new dimension. Unlike, you don't have one throat to choke anymore, and you have to figure out exactly where the problem is, and you need to enable all of the touch points to identify the security challenges. So this is a new dimension. And then finally, energy savings and consumption is a big deal. O-RAN right now is lagging. It is early stages, but it is lagging from an energy consumption and energy efficiency perspective. So there are lots of things that we can do. In fact, Vodafone asked Keysight, Wind River, Intel, and Radisys to engage in an energy test bed. And it is a multi-entity type of a marketplace. So many of these test beds and partnerships have to be created, and we were able to prove the energy efficiency of networks. But that's just a starting point. So a whole new test regime has to be built around security and energy efficiency as well.
Okay, that's good. I think a follow-up question, so there could be some of the changes. We have a draft telecom bill on the way. At the same time, we have some security frameworks in place. How do you think, will it require a major revamp or from an Open RAN perspective? I don't look at Open RAN as a standalone. It's a amalgamation of the other things going together, be it in automation, AI/ML, orchestration, virtualization, software demand, or software operating networks and all. How do you look at the current framework? Anything from your perspective, things can be taken into consideration?
Well, first of all, operators, and I have some of my colleagues here, they really have to look at the roles and responsibilities. It is a multi-entity marketplace, so operators really need to look at how to orchestrate this. What roles have to be played by the different subsystem vendors, and what are the different touch points and handover points that really needs to be thought through. Testing and enablement needs to be thought throughout the entire life cycle, and this is where we have a role to play. We're part of the O-RAN Alliance, clearly 3GPP, and we also have 5G ACIA. These are standards that can be brought to bear from that perspective. From a security perspective, particularly 3GPP SCAS is a good starting point. We would recommend, our position is that it should be mandated on O-RAN networks, and many of the zero trust frameworks can be adopted, and these are things that we are going to be enabling going forward.
Sure, that's a great insight, Kailash. Over to you, Parag. Portability and vendor locking that comes with the existing open COTS DU systems in the platforms. What are your views on that? How do you think the situation we have currently and how that is being looked at, over the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think most of the panel members earlier and now have spoken about Open RAN one way or the other. I just want to take a step back and say, why is Open RAN feasible today, right? It's riding on back of Moore's law, which is actually tapered off. You got the new things in semiconductors called domain-specific architectures that allow you to scale up. So if you look at, we have an equivalent of, or a corollary to Moore's law that I call the law of abstraction. which actually states that, every 10 years your level of abstraction has to grow up. Otherwise, your productivity doesn't improve. So just to look at it, in the software world, if you look at in the early 90s when people built software, you had to port that software to a whole bunch of platforms, and that was a nightmare. And that's why. And then in the 80s and 90s, we used to code most of the stuff in C, and then you moved from C to C++ and C++ to Java, and now today you have Python. So each new programming language actually improved the level of abstraction and therefore productivity. Right? Interesting story, Netflix, when it was founded, apparently it took $3 million and 1.5 years to build a website with those existing tools in the mid 90s. Today, a website is built in half an hour or so. That's because the abstraction and the productivity have improved. Whereas in our networking technologies, what has happened is, we have a 10-year refresh cycle, right, between each generation. So that has to be reduced. And that can be only reduced when you start to, softwareize stuff and also start to build stuff at more abstract levels. So today, 3G and 4G, 4G to an extent was programmable because, you had the layer 1, which was written in mostly in C++, but mostly it was all hardwired. So we are actually at the baby step. In the software, if you take an analogy to the software world, we are in the 80s right now. So you have to go up next there to the higher level of abstraction. And then what happens is, I think anybody who's bought and sold electronics of the enterprise variety knows that scale comes only through volume. Right, the first order benefits of Open RAN are not going to come through just only if you get scale, the costs come down. The second order benefits are when all these things actually it's going to take time. That it's going to take time, and also through network optimization and network automation is something when you're going to get you're going to get the real benefits of it. And finally, if you, on the portability perspective, also the costs will come down if you are open but yet custom. So how do you build solutions that are open but yet custom? And that's a challenge. And that's where, there's work going on. We are moving some work items in Open RAN working groups to allow custom hardware to be onboarded to, onto networks so that you could, as Punch just pointed out, custom hardware or even a different instruction set architecture gives you huge benefits in terms of power. So more custom architecture gives you more benefits, but then it gets locked in. Yeah. So you need to have you need to have systems and frameworks that allow you to do that.
Sure. Thanks, Parag. We have Manish. So Manish, what are the focus areas that should be considered by industry associations, government bodies, to ensure consistent, secure, and interoperable Open RAN deployments?
Well, I think the industry is moving on already, right? And I don't think we need to tell what they need to do because there are a few keywords to this Open RAN, right? There is openness, there is disaggregation, there is cloudification or virtualization, and there is a diversity, right, that we're looking to build. What used to be supplied by a single vendor over into all operator networks is now going to be supplied by a number of vendor partners. Now, the great thing is about this diversity is that now you have multiple choices, but who would basically tell that this is the right choice for me? How do we make sure that component A coming from vendor A and component B coming from somebody else will talk to each other out of the box, right? The whole premise of Open RAN is that we are able to bring in standard interfaces, disaggregate the hardware and software, disaggregate the hardware component from each other. There is a challenge that we are creating in front of the operators, right? I must say, because, what used to be sold to me by one guy, now there are 20 people come to sell me, Okay, I still have to figure out who's right, who's wrong, and how do I make them, interoperate. There are, efforts that are happening, and you would see that, for example, when components have to talk to each other, there are forums like TIP is doing, right? OTIC from the Oren Alliance, who are setting up these labs where they're basically bringing solutions from different players, trying to create a blueprint, define a test, test environment, test cases, and certify them against those, right? This is happening at the subsystem or component level, which you can actually buy. But then there is another interesting problem that Kailash also alluded to, right? There are solutions that you need to build which are not in a state that you can interoperate with anybody else, right? How do you make sure that you are able to test it out in your development cycle? And some of these tools, thanks to our friends, are very expensive, right? And not easy. So not that all the startups can actually buy them, right? So this is where I feel the government has to play a little bit of a role. At least government of India has played certain role. They gave a significant amount of money to all the IITs and a few more organizations to set up what we call the testbed, 5G testbed, right? The whole premise of that 5G testbed was that anybody who goes and builds these, subsystems and components can go in those testbeds, test it out, and mature it. And when they are matured, they bring it into the, the labs like TIP and OTEC, or into operators lab. I mean, the operators have different level of maturity, right? There are some operators who can test everything, right? There are operators who will not be able to test. So there are environment of this kind where interventions are needed. Few of them are there, but much more is needed. And I feel much more is needed at the subcomponent level, where there is significant amount of development work that takes place. And there is, this assurance needed that when I bring this solution out, it is in good shape to interwork with somebody else.
So Manish, being at the operator side, you have a legacy systems. Okay, now this is an openness which is coming out. How do you think this, a combination is going to work? Because you cannot just wipe out the traditional architectures you had.
Yeah.
So how do you look at in terms of an actual problems on ground? Are they going to resolve, or it will take its own time? Because that has an impact on the 5G deployments as well.
Look, brownfield networks is a reality. I mean, you cannot wish it away. In greenfield environments, building Open RAN based solution, right, is fairly simple. Okay, and please don't quote me, simple as in really simple, right? Simpler. That's the word. And then you have seen the examples, right? In Europe, in North America, in Japan, there are networks coming up greenfield, and they have had their challenges. They have gone through, their own maturity cycles. But real challenge of Open RAN is in the brownfield scenario. And the challenge comes from multiple, aspects, right? One of the aspects is obviously the TCO. The TCO is impacted adversely for Open RAN because there is an existing layer of a certain network existing. And the Open RAN cannot interoperate that because, industry defined X2 interfaces and things like that aren't really open. They were supposed to be open, but they aren't open because we really did not pay enough attention when people were roaring on, right? So when they are not open, the penalty has to be paid by the Open RAN, right? And that's something that we need to break. The second challenge that I see, which is a much bigger challenge in my view, is operability of these networks, right? There is a legacy network and there is an Open RAN network. Open RAN, and this is the first time I will use the correct word, Open vRAN, is truly the cloud-based technology that we're talking about. Operating a cloud-based network and operating a legacy network, right? There is huge difference in the way you operate them. Not only in terms of the systems that they are built upon, but also the workforce that operates them. I mean, the workforce that will operate the legacy networks has a way of doing things, right? That they learned for 25 years, okay? The networks that you will run based on Open vRAN requires a different mindset. I mean, a lot of that expertise exists elsewhere into the industry, but not into the telco, right? We need to be able to bring all of that expertise over here and then start to change the processes and mindsets eventually to be able to make sure that, the Open RAN really gets deployed. But I must say that, this is a challenge that industry has to face, because the reality is, whether it is open or not, right? Cloud RAN is a reality. This is something is going to happen. Nobody can stop it. So we need to stand up, raise our hands, make sure that we are retraining our people, make sure that we are redesigning our processes, and starting to adopt, right? The bigger challenge that I see that, which has nothing to do with the brownfield or greenfield, and it has more to do with the way of doing things in Open RAN, right? It may not gain the scale immediately. It requires that support, initial support. It requires that reinforcement of belief that this is the right thing for the industry, and that needs to get done, irrespective of whether you meet TCO, you don't meet TCO, performance guarantees, and things like that, right? So I think this is a little bit altruistic, thought process that one needs to have for Open RAN to really take off, right? And I believe we should be, all operators are putting our efforts behind that. I mean, I know the large number of industry, participants are looking at it from different perspectives, but I seriously look at it from the, 10-year, 15-year point of view. If we really have to, change the way networks are built and operated upon, the change has to begin now.
Sure, thanks. Parag, you wanted to add
Yeah,
something?
just one quick point to what Manish said as well, right? I think the role of the SI now become, more like a marketplace guy in the e-commerce world. If you look at it, there's this e-commerce platforms and there are buyers and there are sellers. So today, if you want to build a RAN, it actually costs you about $200-300 million or upwards if you are, not based in India. Even in India, you need a lot of money to build that. So the disaggregation today is actually, I think, is very coarse, right, between the RU and the DU. You need to get much more finer in the disaggregation, which is eventually going to a microservices architecture where, you could, there are a lot of these small guys in universities who can build. I talk about the layer 1 who are good at building channel estimation algorithms, who can actually churn out maybe a dB or 2 dB performance better, but they can't integrate it into the system because they just don't have the wherewithal to actually build silicon and take it there. So kind of a RAN marketplace, which will eventually evolve, would be a area, like he said, the altruistic thing with a commercial sense in the longer term, where you have this very fine microservice architecture with a RAN marketplace is what will accrue all the benefits that have been talked about.
Sure, thanks, Parag. I think.
Let me make a quick comment about the investment point that Manish raised, right? But Manish, you articulated all of the challenges that need to be overcome. I mean, you need the assurance. Boss, you also need you're going to sleep peacefully when these networks are deployed and your customers are happy. So it is worth the investment.
Okay, so now to conclude, so I have a question from all of you. Would like to, if you can conclude in 1 to 2 minutes. We have all sorts of technologies that are coming up. Open RAN is one of them. I think we'd say an Open RAN or a 5G or a large-scale IoT deployments or maybe virtualization, cloud vRAN you talked about. I have 2 questions. Maybe you'd like to answer a sentence for each. What would be the gestation period you see it's going to take in India from a context we have at hand? Second, what would be the top driving factor to make it happen? Because we have spoken enough of the challenges. I think what is a positive outlook that is going to drive these kind of an intervention? I would like to start with Punch.
Yeah, thank you. So Manish, thanks for bringing a sense of realism in the conversation, right? So the 2 questions, one was like what needs to happen and what time frames, right? I'll talk about what needs to happen, right? So there are technology problems, but technology problems will be resolved, right? It's, I think, a business and an investment problem, and we need a godfather to kind of put in the money. It can be people with large amounts of money, usually governments, right? Or it's operators, they're always cash trapped. Or it can come from like big hyperscalers that can invest heavily to make it happen, right? So that needs to happen. In terms of time frame, I think we'll start seeing adoption slowly. By at least, this is my prediction, don't quote me. By late 20s, we'll see about 40% of the networks being virtualized.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yep.
over to you.
Yeah, no, sure. So a few points that I wanted to herald again, right? So I think that there is that mindset shift that needs to happen, and it's at all levels. I think another area that we didn't touch upon necessarily, but which we face as vendors to the customer, for instance, is also the whole procurement process and all that. I think to me also what will become increasingly important is to understand what is the customer vision and where do they want to position themselves into the value chain. I mean, coming back to your point, and we didn't really discuss that around the hyperscalers and the fact that you have those really well-funded new players coming into the market and looking where to position themselves. I mean, to me, this is where the service providers are really important, because I think they are the market shifters. When customers such as Airtel or Verizon and the likes, decide to go one direction, they kind of set the tone and the pace, for the rest of the industry. So I think, coming back to your question, what will make it different and what is going to be an acceleration factor? I think, the thought leaders in that area are the ones that are going to, to define what is going to, how quickly the change is going to, to happen.
Sure. How about the timelines you envisage?
I think, I would actually argue that this is already happening. So to me, the question is not so much around whether it's happening or who's going to go first. I think it's really how quickly or to what extent they will decide to go for open vRAN. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks,
Okay.
Laurence.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think network disaggregation, right, is happening in two phases, and the two phases are overlapping. I think Laurence touched upon it. Horizontal disaggregation and vertical disaggregation. And what the world is seeing more is about horizontal disaggregation, right, where the radio and baseband units are two distinct components of what was originally a monolithic base station, right? And here we see operators today, taking a radio unit from vendor A and a baseband unit from vendor B. And because well-defined open standards are not there, right? The operator is taking the pain of doing the integration of what we now call the integration tax, right?
Yep.
I think if from a horizontal disaggregation point of view, if the interface specifications are well defined so that there is no ambiguity in implementation, I think it will lead to Open RAN being much more widely deployed, right? And also I think, in the telco world, we still have very limited use of DevOps, CI/CD, right? But if the ecosystem players, right, who are building the radio, the baseband unit, and various other components, software components, if they all adopt DevOps, and we are able to test them out, we are able to catch defects early, it will also help in quick and wider adoption of Open RAN, right? So, and I think, what the world really has not seen is the vertical disaggregation, where I think is the real benefit of Open RAN, right? Because what you do in a vertical disaggregation, the real-time sensitive functions, right? You leave it in the hardware, and everything else is in software. And this, when you have this type of model, then you really bring the app model from the IT world into Open RAN. So today it is very difficult for a startup because of all the test equipment and the capex involved for a startup to even think of building a solution on Open RAN, right? But if you are able to build apps on top of, say, the RIC, right, the radio intelligent controller, it is easy for an innovative startup to get in, find, build apps for, say, interference management, for radio resource management, right? So these are, I think, some of the steps that need to be followed for much wider deployment of Open RAN.
Sure.
Now, your question of when will Open RAN get deployed, right? I think it will be a slow evolution. It won't happen suddenly. What we will see Open RAN being deployed first in rural areas, in tier 2, tier 3 cities, right? And then maturing into urban, dense urban areas. Similarly, what we'll see is Open RAN being used more in the context of 5G private networks, which is actually a very big market, right? So I think Open RAN, like any other disruptive technology, needs to find a foothold, needs to find a niche, and then it will, expand into all areas of the network, right? Whether it is dense urban, whether it is for massive MIMO, right?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think the rural part that is very important for us.
Let me just talk about the timing. Today we have many trials that are occurring. In fact, Japan has taken kind of the lead in deploying O-RAN networks. So we see 2023 could be a year of scale for front haul of macro networks. So I think this technology is going to start to scale in some areas starting 2023. It's also been made national priorities in many countries, UK, US, Europe, and now in India. I think that bodes well for the technology, and it's going to be a steady process through the rest of the decade. Looking at what are the two main things, if I have to leave the audience with two main things. One, I think an incremental approach is probably recommended. You don't need to, get your network functions, all of the network functions from different vendors. Yep. You don't need all of the interfaces to interoperate at the beginning. So it can be a gradual process. It can be an incremental process. So it's important to view it that way. The second piece is it is a multi-entity marketplace. So by definition, you need to have these plug fests, these certification regimes, more collaboration, and I think Keysight in partnership with many of the members in O-RAN Alliance is really helping enable that ecosystem.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, so I think like what Panch said, in India we've got this UPI, right? That was some kind of an Open RAN for the fintech market. So it needs to be that level. I mean, we could have an India telecom stack that actually can provide the tailwind. And then coming to your timelines, I think like Manish said, you have to make a distinction between Open RAN and Open vRAN. And based on that, it's very geography specific. I think Open RAN as we speak is being deployed as Kailash and Jayanta and somebody else said. Open vRAN will take much longer than, especially in India.
Sure, thank you. I think Manish, there's a lot of onus on you, a lot of pressure by the other leaders as well. It's an operator to, step in.
Well, it is always the operator. Well, I mean, as far as drivers are concerned, right, as to when the Open RAN will really become mainstream, my view is, look, our customers does not distinguish whether you are receiving your mobile signal on a legacy from a legacy base station or an Open RAN, right? You don't. How do we make sure that the performance that we are asking these Open RAN systems to do is right there? Is it matching, almost matching? I don't expect them to be 100% on day one because that's unrealistic, right? But they should be matching, and that's when I believe, key aspect of maturity of the systems being available. Timeline is very difficult to predict because of the geographical spread that we're talking about. Every operator in every country has got a different, compulsion or way of doing things, right? My belief is that Open RAN to succeed, it has to succeed in India. It must succeed in India because if for this population and for this scale, we don't bring in Open RAN, I don't see anything else will support the volumes that are needed, the skills that are needed for this to become a mainstream technology.
Well, that's a great hope, Manish. I think with that, I also wrote while you were saying, it seems there's no doubt that this shift towards more openness is moving in the right direction. It's about how we harness and how the incumbents take the new entrants hand to hand to make it workable. With this, we conclude the session. It's a pleasure to have the panelists. I think thank you for all your time. We ran late, but thank you for all the support. Thank you. Yeah.